Well, firstly, I think, most magically, that all our dreams came true. That we stuck by each other through thin and thin and thinner. And yeah, everything we longed for and dreamt of, and it happened.
Ramshackle, romantic, mercurial and maddening in equal measure, Babyshambles offer a tantalising portent of the creative possibilities of a retro-futuristic British guitar rock manifesto. Unashamedly nostalgic but simultaneously keen to avoid lackadaisical pastiche, Pete Doherty and co are committed to capturing the visceral thrill of classic rock and roll, whilst embodying a brazen love of the poetry of the everyday. Rousing, flawed, squalid and yet at times gloriously limpid and heartfelt, the racket they produce is a scintillating, wide-eyed mess shot through with a compelling artistic outsider sensibility. Doherty has talent and imagination to spare, whilst his army of reprobates wield the potential to become major icons of 21st century popular art. The story of the Libertines, Doherty's relationships with Carl Barrett, Kate Moss and hard drugs, is inextricably tied up in the Babyshambles saga, and it would be absurd to relegate Doherty's personal crises to footnote status in this tale. However, there is much to admire in his literary hunger, his deft powers of expression, and his group's degenerate charm. The media, not surprisingly, have revelled in the schadenfreude of the Doherty tabloid soap, and the rock and roll outlaw image won't leave him for a moment. In newspapers, he is constantly seen on the margins of sobriety, to say the least, often seemingly cast adrift from reality and in his own lost world. He has come to symbolise the alienated hedonistic frustrations of a certain kind of British masculinity in early 21st century life, where a hunger for experience and transcendence often comes at a high price. His lust for life is an affirmation and not a nihilistic negation of reality, as some have argued. Despite the media notoriety, the music has always mattered more than anything else, and he has been able to connect with many souls because of this. His antics threaten to overshadow the worth of Babyshambles' product, but his raw, explosive talent proves him to be an artist of a stature equal to his wider totemic infamy in popular culture. Babyshambles are loose and tortured yet eloquent, frightening and incendiary purveyors of a timeless, organic kind of English whimsy and an eccentric, punky swagger. A song like Albion, for example, encapsulates the Doherty project in one beautiful, wistful, ethereal snapshot, an absurdly superior nugget of delicious melody and ragged charm. The sound is evergreen, and the lyrical ingenuity could have sprung from the page of a Philip Larkin or a W.H. Auden poem. Moments like these embody his retro-classicist leanings, yet filter a romantic Arcadian vision of England through an edgy contemporary setting. This modern-day Arthur Rimbaud figure can be mawkish, banal and slipshod at times, but is also capable of penning elegant, penetrating, elegiac lyrics of intense beauty and conjuring slabs of ineffable musical grandiloquence. He can come up with startling words of poetry and juxtapose them with irresistible, infectious tunes in the grand tradition of the finest scuffed-up rock and roll. The term outsider art has never seemed more apposite. Pete Doherty has injected sex, glamour, decadence and bookish intelligence back into pop music at a time when it was in an extremely limited supply. In an epoch saturated with TV-groomed boy and girl bands, ersatz rebellion and media manipulation, his uncompromising vision, lifestyle and sensitivity have endeared him to a generation of fans and critics. They recognise a thoughtful, literate sensibility amidst the bohemia, the myth-making and the front-page controversies. Babyshambles offer a new creative autonomy for Pete Doherty, a chance to explore the direction trumpeted on the beloved sessions released on the internet. This is less punk-influenced and more introspective, betraying an idiom that is nonetheless utterly his own, resembling no one else's. The exploratory intensity of his work, evoking the mediated drama and metaphor of English poetry at its finest, makes for a bloodless creativity, only occasionally compromised by egocentric indulgence. His extravagant gifts make him potentially a blazing synthesis of Joe Strummer and John Betjeman. Those wild imaginative flights and idiosyncratic use of language typify a rich elusiveness that is beyond the reach of even the most respected rock and pop songwriters. He is a songsmith of effortless natural facility, harmonic melodic subtlety, and a genuinely profound understanding of the heart astonishing in one so young. Has any other musician of the past 25 years made such a dazzling entrance on the scene at such a tender age? Precocious, dark, romantic, alluring and spontaneous, the best Babyshambles songs are miraculously accomplished, brimming with ideas. Incessantly restless in design, these tunes convey a vitality that is impossible to disguise. For Doherty, fidelity to experience, to how things feel, rather than what the mind makes of them in recollection, is paramount. Due to this, some see him as an eccentric self-mythologist, but there's no trace of self-regard or wanton posturing on these records. He simply possesses wide-open senses and a powerfully spiritual temperament. Life to him remains a wonderful ebbing mystery, an almost continuous theatrical performance. In his work, he is merely being himself and opening himself to the world rather than indulging his whims. His unfettered artistry is sensitive to detail, nuanced, coloristic and opulent, reflecting his view of reality. There are redemptive virtues in all of Babyshambles' work, though some bear the mark of being half-finished. Too sophisticated to bestow influence over those less accomplished than he, Doherty remains an intriguing, puzzling, incandescent figure nonetheless. This singularly, starkly original artist of self-immolating passion and sprawling, chaotic, imperfect beauty offers us what we've been denied for a long time: magical luminosity, fragile translucence, and a healing, mystical belief in the power of art. Babyshambles and Pete Doherty display a power beyond our preconceptions, projecting into us a mesmerising, almost subliminal magnificence. Music needs them.
It was the realm of the infinite, and still is. On any given day, we seek to find ourselves there in that a kind of poet's paradise. Not like the rural idyll of yore, but some, I don't know, you can follow a melody like, down a dark alley, and then you press a brick and all of a sudden the scenery will swing around and you find yourself in this extraordinary glade with all manner of things to excite you.
The Libertines came to the rescue of British guitar music at a time when intoxicating, grimy tales of idyllic Arcadia and passionate, flawed unpredictability were deemed unfashionable and archaic. They seized the imagination of their young audience in a way that only the Gallagher brothers achieved back in the early to mid-1990s. NME put them on the front cover before a single had even been issued, and some sceptics scoffed at the notion of a chaotic, thrilling and literate band coming along in this new century of media cynicism, tired rehashes and plastic identikit pop. The Libertines, Pete Doherty, Carl Barrett, John Hassell and Gary Powell signed to Rough Trade at Christmas 2001. They found the perfect home to make their crossover from indie punks to mainstream stars. The Libertines were resolutely intelligent, anarchic and fired up by the listlessness surrounding homegrown guitar rock. Their influences came from the Albion whimsy of the Kinks, the melodic punk of the Buzzcocks and the Jam, and the belligerent rage of the Clash. They seemed happy to perpetuate an image of glamorous decadence, and in Doherty and Barrett they possessed perhaps the most exciting songwriting partnership since the halcyon days of Morrissey and Marr. There was a beautiful tension between the scuzzy, reckless abandon of the music and the charming, literate tenderness of the words. The band were named after one of Doherty's favourite texts by the Marquis de Sade, The Lusts of the Libertines. In this context, the concept of a person unimpeded by orthodox mores and values. As word got round the music press of a new British Strokes, an irrepressible momentum gathered. They set their stall out at a low-key, yet sold-out gig at London's Cherry Jam in February 2002. And the physical violence on stage, mainly conducted by Doherty and Barrett as they pushed each other and tore each other's shirts, served as a portent for the intense fragility of their relationship. NME were ecstatic, referencing the Strokes, the Smiths and the Jam. They supported the Strokes on 2 dates in the same month and then opened for the Vines in March. The debut single, What a Waster, was unleashed in June 2002 and entered the charts despite being banned from the airwaves for its colourful language. They supported the Sex Pistols in July and recorded their debut album in the summer. In the studio, Barrett and Doherty clashed on more than one occasion, including an infamous drunken pretend fight at 6 a.m. that escalated into something nastier. Rouse, decadence and drunken and chemical excess became intrinsic to the group's working methods. NME became fixated with them, regularly devoting features to these colourful, exciting and erratic upstarts. In October 2002, the debut album Up the Bracket was issued to an enthusiastic reception. It had been recorded during an intensely difficult period for Doherty, one in which drugs, women and hard partying played prominent roles. The title was a reference to a catchphrase of Sid James from the Carry On films, meaning a punch in the face. Mick Jones of The Clash was recruited to produce the album sessions after being sent a CD of their music. He recognised a kindred spirit etched into these grooves, not to mention a significant debt to The Clash in the energy, style and delivery. He loved the fact that they were from London. There were 4 of them. They were a proper, no-holds-barred rock and roll group, and their lyrics surpassed the vast majority of what was out there at the time. Funny, sleazy, rough and ready and gutsy, this debut is a remarkable piece of work for a new band starting out. From the vocal styling to the guitar sound and the lyrics, the spirit of The Clash hovered over the Libertines' tunes like a benevolent ghost. There are pockets of brilliance scattered over this album, from exhilarating sing-along terrace anthems such as Boys in the Band and joyous romps like Time for Heroes, to tender introspective fare like Tell the King. Critics noted the raw, high-adrenaline nods to The Clash, the Jam and the Buzzcocks, but also were seduced by the allusions to a forgotten Arcadian idyll, an elusive golden age of Albion. This wistful quality was reinforced by the astute choice of retro military jackets for the photo shoots. Time for Heroes is magnificent, a latter-day complete control full of romantic lyrical mythology, class warfare and lilting yearning, while Boys in the Band documents the group's rise to fame. Horror Show deals with the dark side of drug use in stark, matter-of-fact terms. Death on the Stairs offers a perfect synthesis of the 2 songwriters' talents, and Radio America is soaked in desperate longing. Up the Bracket is quintessentially English, steeped in the explorations of the finest guitar groups of the past 35 years, yet wields a charm and a youthful insouciance that marks them out as distinctive, original and subversive. The amount of detail invested into these stories by dividing up the dialogue between Barrett and Doherty makes for a compelling, almost quaint soap opera feel throughout. There is no excess fat on display, songs never outstay their welcome, and there is a tender, poetic sensitivity at the very heart of everything they do. The American release of the album in March generated a college-endorsed buzz around the band stateside. But their first appearance there, at the Coachella Festival in New York, was aborted after 2 songs when Doherty threw the microphone at the crowd and left the stage, disgruntled by the behaviour of the previous group Ladytron. Meanwhile, Doherty's drug use was escalating out of proportion, so much so that close friends of his began cutting him out of their lives. He was introduced to intravenous heroin during a shambolic recording session in New York in May 2003, and the allure of crack cocaine proved too much to resist. The criticism from Barrett and other close friends fell on deaf ears. The hostility of others only pushed him further into the lives of those equipped to service his burgeoning appetites. Doherty and Barrett had built a friendship based on mutual appreciation of each other's talent, a belief in the importance of what they were trying to achieve, and a desire to bypass the industry mechanisms and reach out to their audience in a more accessible manner. Up the Bracket had sold in excess of 100,000 units. They had played at the Leeds and Reading festivals, and their DIY guerrilla gigs at the Albion rooms had developed a genuine cult following. They were committed to breaking down the barriers between artist and audience, leading to numerous stage invasions where crowd and band became one. However, the tensions simmered in the background at all times. At the NME Awards in February 2003, the guys felt that Doherty's drugged-up appearance ruined the glorious triumph of their best new band gong. He failed to turn up for the band's appearance at a festival in Nuremberg in June, and they carried on without him. Doherty ranted against his bandmates through the medium of the fans' website, and they chose NME.com to confirm that he would not be appearing on the impending UK tour. Anthony Rosamando entered the fray whilst Doherty indulged his habits.
I think I was always sung to and always read stories from an early age, which is very important, I think, for a child and their creativity. But I don't know, maybe to know where it came from or even what it is would be to dispel all the magic around it. And I don't know, there isn't really a formula, is there, for creativity?
The February 2003 tour of Scandinavia and Germany would prove to be the last that Doherty enjoyed with the band. Barrett moved out of the flat he had shared with his wayward partner after discovering that thieves had broken in and stolen his equipment. The ubiquitous presence of crack smokers also necessitated a change of plan, so he moved into his own private flat in London. By June 2003, Doherty's immersion in an underworld of groupies, drugs and self-destruction had alienated him from the others. As his status within the group oscillated between extremes, his fans and the media grew increasingly perplexed. Word had it that he was embraced as a full-time member again, but then another disappearing act and another successful tour without him suggested that he was on the road to disintegration. A single, Don't Look Back into the Sun, produced by Bernard Butler of Suede fame, was greeted enthusiastically and reached 11 in the singles chart, despite Doherty's increasing unreliability in the studio and arguments with Butler. Whilst the band were touring without him, Doherty entered rehab for a couple of days, shaved his hair off, lost weight, saw his first child enter the world but then split up with her mother, Lisa Moorish. In July 2003, while the rest of the band were in Japan, he raided Barrett's flat in a crack-fuelled frenzy and booted the door in, proceeding to steal his musical equipment. He was so high that he didn't even notice passers-by staring at him as he got into the car with his booty. He was arrested on a tip-off from Moorish and taken to Horseferry Magistrates Court. He was addicted to hard drugs and needed money for his next fix. His ex-partner was off running his group without him, and he felt desolate and alone. He pleaded guilty and went to the Evening Standard about his substance addictions, thereby graduating from a cultish concern to major popular culture icon. His 6-month sentence was reduced at Middlesex Guildhall Crown Court, halved on appeal, and became 2 months and then 1 for good behaviour. Barrett honoured his friend by greeting him at the gates of Wandsworth Jail on the day he was released, October the 8th, and things looked to be improving. They played a gig that night at the Tap and Tin Club in Chatham in Kent and began writing new songs for the second album. Meanwhile, Doherty tasted top 10 success in tandem with his Camden drug friend Wolfman with the wonderful For Lovers single, and the Libertines were named Best British Band at the NME Awards. Doherty and Barrett managed to overcome most of their personal differences during the recording of their follow-up to Up the Bracket, but a tense, uptight atmosphere prevailed. In the meantime, Alan McGee had taken over the management of the group from an exhausted Banny Pucci, and Rosamando was rejected from the lineup. With Mick Jones at the production helm, there was only going to be one outcome. The second disc in the Libertines catalogue, simply titled The Libertines, was unleashed with glee before an eager fan base and didn't disappoint. From the glistening opening salvo of Can't Stand Me Now through to What Became of the Likely Lads, it is evident that the tempestuous relationship between the two protagonists at the heart of the band is etched into every groove of the disc. Can't Stand Me Now is exhilarating, goosebump-inducing stuff, a marvellous opening statement of intent. Recalling the peaks of the Clash, this rollercoaster ride of a song picks away at the scars of their friendship, revealing their feelings about the drugs, the burglary, and the perceived betrayals. The sizzling verbal tennis generated between Doherty and Barrett here makes for a strangely uplifting listen. What Became of the Likely Lads is stuffed full of references to their troubles and again features magnificent sparring dialogue between the two songwriters. It exudes a certain honesty and optimism, yet retains a nostalgic, elegiac atmosphere that suggests a self-knowledge and acceptance of fate. The saga represents Doherty's frankest admission yet of his wastrel ways and the havoc they have wreaked. Don't Be Shy is a relatively throwaway filler. Last Post on the Bugle and the Ha Ha Wall retread a generic Libertines path to some extent, and Road to Ruin feels underwritten. But What Katie Did and Music When the Lights Go Off offers glimpses of exquisite poise and melancholy beauty. The album is spontaneous, visceral, energising and candid, even possessing the confidence to leave in mumbles, comments, impromptu exclamations and even the odd wrong note. In a climate dominated by the minor key torpor of Coldplay sound-alikes, this record has a fizz, a sincerity and an urgency that leaves the listener in perpetual awe and astonishment. The sessions took place over a period of 2 months, but the underlying friction between the two protagonists, resulting in Barrett leaving before completion, ensured that it had to be cobbled together with the help from fragments and bits and pieces of earlier tracks. In the meantime, Doherty had signalled his intentions of liberation from the Libertines by striking out on his own with a fledgling project called Babyshambles. This was born from his attempts to perform live with some friends from Yorkshire, including ex-Libertines Scarborough Steve under the banner of the Libertines during his intermittent periods of exile from the group. Doherty's drug problems were attracting the attention of the front pages of the tabloid press, as well as the music press. He entered the Priory at a time when his addiction was totally unrestrained, threatening to engulf his life. Barrett visited him, despite the tumultuous recording sessions for the Libertines, but there seemed something amiss. He left the Priory after a week and lied to the Sun that he'd left the group, throwing a very public verbal grenade at Barrett in the process. He checked in to the Tam Kabrok Monastery in central Thailand, but couldn't see his rehabilitation through to its 10-day completion. He had a breakdown of sorts after only 3 days there and collapsed in tears. The rigorous constraints imposed by the monks proved to be impossible for him to adhere to. He fled the monastery and checked into a Bangkok hotel where he returned to his old ways and begged his fans for money for his flight home. He knew that he'd let down his family, Barrett and his fans. Days after returning to London, he was charged with speeding, driving without a licence and carrying an offensive weapon. At this point, with Barrett and Doherty's relationship teetering on collapse and the ragged chaos of the second album's completion still fresh in the memory, the other Libertines and Rough Trade decided that he'd had enough second chances. The band no longer needed their wayward singer for any recording obligations, and their impatience with his unpredictability had worn thin. Barrett sacked his musical partner and friend from the group, wording the statement so as to sound sympathetic to his various problems. "We aim to complete all existing tour commitments without him. Peter's erratic mental state worries us greatly, and having him on tour would only compound his problems." From July 2004 onwards, Doherty's life in the Libertines would be relegated to the past tense. Doherty was staggered by the news and slipped further into drug excess, taking huge quantities of heroin and crack. He could now use his banishment from the band as an excuse for his habits. The Libertines chapter in the Doherty soap opera was now closed, but his artistry and his creative struggle still needed an outlet.
don't know, well, there wasn't a script. I suppose, in a way, I'm only happy playing my guitar or prancing about. So, no, it wasn't an act, I don't think. There's never been a script or a role to play. Oh, I'm happy when I'm in Arcadia and all my senses are being filled with music or love or some other stimulant. I'd say I was as happy now as I was then.
Initially, Doherty had viewed Babyshambles as a loose collective of performing artistes and an outlet for what he couldn't express within the increasingly controlled Libertines setup. He had wanted Barrett to be part of the collective of musicians involved, but Barrett had walked out of the Babyshambles sessions in New York after finding the quality of the music to be substandard and viewing the various druggy hangers-on with contempt and suspicion. Doherty felt betrayed by his exclusion from the Libertines and looked to Babyshambles as a proper concern and a plausible replacement. He viewed the new group as an extension of the Libertines' spontaneous lo-fi guerrilla gigs at the Albion rooms and other low-key haunts around London. Whilst Barrett was keen to make the Libertines as big as their label mates, the Strokes, Doherty was heading in the opposite direction, espousing the ethics of the underground and conflating the roles of performer and audience. The mythical Babyshambles sessions became a lost treasure trove of recordings, and Doherty handed the tapes over to a fan who, at his request, made the songs available to hardcore devotees over the internet. They were accessed as a CD set on internet auction sites such as eBay and downloaded for free. Various lineups of Babyshambles were tried and aborted, with Scarborough Steve and Neil Thunders popping up intermittently. He began to stage guerrilla gigs on a more regular basis, which were uplifting and packed out with fans. In the meantime, the Libertines' second album made a massive commercial breakthrough, hitting the top of the album charts and doubling their previous sales in the US within a few days of its release. The first eponymous Babyshambles single was recorded in New York and released on the High Society label. Fewer than 1,000 copies of the CD and 7-inch were initially released and were changing hands on eBay for more than £50 each. Eventually, a further 3,000 were issued, but the mania surrounding Doherty was such that they could have sold 5 times that number. Even a year down the line, copies were changing hands on eBay for up to £100. Doherty's drug use at this time was spiralling out of control. Crack and heroin were never far from the equation, but he somehow kept it together musically, and the single reached 32 in the charts. The group underwent several changes in personnel before stabilising in the summer of 2004, with Doherty on vocals, Patrick Walden on guitar, Gemma Clark on drums and Drew McConnell on bass. James Mullard became the group's manager. It seemed that a degree of stability had been established. Doherty remained fiercely serious about his new project, claiming that it felt like a liberation from the ego clashes and tensions of his former group. He simply wanted to express himself freely and communicate those expressions to his fans in as accessible a way as possible. It was about reducing his art to a simple level, devoid of the unnecessary and distracting embellishments of the industry game. He kept his fans up to date with his activities, using a laptop to post diary entries and bulletins on the Babyshambles website. If anything, the affection he received from his audience increased in its intensity. If he failed to show at a gig, fans would bombard NME with calls and messages asking after his whereabouts and well-being. The guerrilla gigs Babyshambles performed were possessed by a strange, magical alchemy of goodwill, poetic expression, bohemian cool, and democratic participation. Doherty's status as a latter-day Pied Piper of rock and roll was growing by the day. The Libertines carried on without their alluring, charismatic ex-frontman, wooing festival audience throughout the summer of 2004 and bringing back Anthony Rosamando. Rumours persisted throughout these performances of Doherty's rejoining them on stage, but they came to nothing. Can't Stand Me Now was issued as a single and reached number 2 in the charts. During September and October 2004, Babyshambles embarked upon a British tour that culminated in 2 sold-out shows at the London Scala. Despite claims that they were only on tour so as to raise money to fund their leader's burgeoning drug consumption, it sold out and received many glowing reviews in both the music press and broadsheets. In November 2004, Babyshambles unveiled their second single for release and first on Rough Trade Records, entitled Kilimanjaro. Amazingly, this high-energy, infectious song reached number 8 in the singles charts. Initially released in incomplete form over the internet as part of the Babyshambles sessions, Kilimanjaro is a swooning, swaggering stomp, juxtaposing irresistibly catchy, punchy music with considered, reflective lyrics, in this case the subject of fame and celebrity and the expectations and idealism of an artist's fan base. It is gritty, catchy without being contrived, heartfelt and unforgettable. The arrangement is seamless and the lyrics poignant. Written by a young man aroused and dissatisfied by both the concept and the reality of a very public success, and not quite recognising himself in the process, this song is simply exquisite, stirring and moving. On the flip, The Man Who Came to Stay is another reflective, though more melancholy gem. Slower and quieter, though no less intense, it luxuriates in the idea of Doherty as a prophet caught up in the media madness of his own myth. As an examination of one young man's quest for meaning, though, it ranks up there with such pivotal texts as Unlovable by the Smiths, Philip Larkin's The Importance of Elsewhere, Michael Cunningham's A Home at the End of the World, and Patrick Hamilton's Hangover Square. Babyshambles embarked upon another tour in December amid increasing worries about Doherty's flirtation with disintegration. This tour proved to be a shocker. He turned up late for a gig in aid of the homeless charity shelter and was thrown out by security men. He was ejected from the Top of the Pops studio for brawling with somebody in the audience and cancelled an Aberdeen date because he had overdosed. At a gig in Blackpool, the rest of the band walked off stage in shame when it transpired that Doherty was just too intoxicated to perform. He had to be dragged off stage in a state of collapse by his management. Increasingly, it seemed that neither record label nor promoter was willing to endure such unpredictability. He was seen as an insurance liability likely to blow out as many shows as he actually played. Doherty saw out the year of 2004 in a strange, messy, chaotic storm of no-shows, inebriation and media candour, bizarrely culminating in a 12-minute interview and music feature with Kirsty Walk on BBC Two's Newsnight. This was his first major television interview, and though he didn't have any new songs to promote, he came across as eloquent, sympathetic and resolute. He played an acoustic version of Music When the Lights Go Out that could only be described as jaw-droppingly perfect. Shimmering, translucent, profound and glorious, this song reminded us all that here was a genuine talent capable of depth, poetry and soul-bearing pathos. A matter of hours after recording the Newsnight feature and the day after the Libertines had officially disbanded, Doherty failed to show for Babyshambles' biggest concert to date, their end-of-year gig at London's Astoria. The crowd waited for him until 2 a.m. and ended up rioting and stealing musical equipment from the stage. The band's drummer, Gemma Clark, was particularly incensed by this latest no-show, as she was specifically targeted by the drunken crowds as they battled over her equipment. Her tolerance levels were plummeting. As a means of apologising to his fans, Doherty saw in the new year with a marathon stint of 4 gigs in one night, starting at 9 p.m. and ending at 3:30 a.m. This exhausting schedule took in Birmingham, Stoke, Oldham and Manchester. As the night wore on, the atmosphere became more strained, with fans invading the stage and bar and emptying drink down their throats and all over the floor. At the Manchester gig, a series of punch-ups broke out. This sense of disarray within the Babyshambles camp would prove to be too much for Gemma Clark, not to mention legions of media pundits.
It wasn't like all of a sudden we were fighting. You know, in the past, long before we'd had any attention from anyone but ourselves, we were scrapping and we'd go months without talking. wasn't like all of a sudden we developed this like love-hate relationship up from just loving each other. We'd always been antagonising each other or winding each other up.
With Doherty's erratic behaviour eventually proving too problematic for Clark, she quit the group in January 2005. She cited disagreements with the management, who she considered were acting irresponsibly and failing to address their leader's conspicuous addictions. It upset her to watch Doherty destroying himself and receiving no stability or control from those closest to him. She even went so far as to say that everyone in and surrounding the band were on drugs, with the exception of the road crew and herself. Doherty's operation to surgically implant an opiate blocker called nalextrone was going to have only limited impact, it seemed. Clark was replaced by White Sports' Adam Fisek, but her misgivings about the circus surrounding Doherty were shared by many of his oldest friends and colleagues. The group's manager, James Millord, knew only too well of the potential dangers of his charge's lifestyle, but was noticeably less hands-on than the Libertines' manager, Banny, had been. Industry insiders were chomping at the bit to hear new Babyshambles product, but Doherty's increasingly bizarre lifestyle, eye for the ladies and any substances that came his way, conspired to delay the recording of the debut album. The rest of the band were frustrated that they couldn't get on with the job without him, as he was the leader, life spirit and totem of the whole project. They had to learn to bide their time. Events in February 2005, however, scuppered any possibilities of recording anything of any note. On the day they were all set to enter the studio, Doherty was arrested along with fellow musician Alan Wass on suspicion of assault and blackmail. It was alleged that Doherty assaulted a documentary maker, Max Carlish, at the Rookery Hotel in London, a charge he vehemently denied. Carlish was a fawning, awestruck fan who had followed his hero around, shooting film and chatting to him. They had agreed to share his profits of the filming. When Carlish gave the Sunday Mirror a series of photographs of Doherty smoking heroin, banking an estimated £30,000 in the process, their relationship took a downward turn. He sold the same pictures to the News of the World and even suggested that his idol could have some of the cash if he would use it for drug rehab and studio time. Doherty had become involved with the supermodel Kate Moss at this time, and the newspapers ran spreads appealing her to dump this wastrel. Doherty denied everything and confronted the filmmaker, allegedly robbing him. This was when Carlish made his allegation of assault. As a consequence, Doherty had spent 4 nights in Pentonville jail until Rough Trade coughed up the bail sum of £150,000. Rehab was another condition of him making bail, which the label were unwilling to meet. So Doherty went to The Sun for an interview. In this interview, he vowed to go clean for the sake of his high-profile girlfriend, and the tabloid agreed to pay a £12,000 bill for his rehab. His relationship with Moss was tainted, though, and this drama heralded a series of compelling break-up, reconciliation, break-up stories. As for Carlish, his footage was eventually pieced together by Channel 4 and shown as a late-night documentary entitled Stalking Pete Doherty. After being released on bail, Doherty immersed himself with his group in a recording studio in Wales, toiling over the debut album. All charges were dropped against him in April 2005. Mick Jones, now a committed fan of practically everything Doherty touched, was the natural choice of producer for the sessions in Twin Peaks Studio near Brecon. The record promised to deliver a document of Bohemian Arcadia, a true representation of what Doherty was striving to achieve in the early days of the Libertines. They recorded throughout April and May 2005. In the meantime, Doherty spoke to the press about his departure from the Libertines and disowned the second album. He claimed to The Guardian that it had nothing to do with him, that he had gone by the time the album was finished and the artwork was being decided. He did, however, praise the band's debut, calling Up the Bracket a classic album. Also during the interview, he revealed that he is constantly plagued by demons that appear as frightening hallucinations, digits in the face and colours and numbers crawling through his skin. He admitted that he'd been having these hallucinations since he was a child, long before he ever took a drug. Moss and Doherty continued to split and then get back together again as a watchful media clamoured to get their fill. Moss dumped him after discovering that he'd sent grainy pictures of her from his rehabilitation clinic to The Sun. It seemed that he needed the attention of The Sun and other tabloids as much as he needed the love of the controversial supermodel. Their perpetually stormy relationship, something would blow up in the media and she would dump him and vow to never go near him again, followed by the inevitable reunion, occupied increasing amounts of press and television. As a backstory to this, the recording of the Babyshambles album was creating a mythology all of its own. Songs were in such short supply that there were rumours that a re-recorded version of What Katie Did was going to make up the number on the disc. Bookmakers offered long odds on whether or not it would make its mooted release date in October. It was also rumoured that Moss would be making a singing cameo on the record, which Alan McGee was quick to renounce, no doubt the memory of her duet with Bobby Gillespie still fresh in his mind. Rough Trade insisted everything was going smoothly. Doherty was out of rehab again and vowing to clean up his act. He also announced a 19-date British tour in September and October and attacked the tabloids for describing him as a junkie, which he claimed was untrue. He wanted to return to making his art as beautiful and eloquent as it could possibly be.
You got to remember, I've been barred from playing with the band. So anything else that follows, really, I mean, it could be no worse or no more surprising than that. To me, that's just about the worst thing that could have happened.
The Pete and Kate saga increased its roller coaster momentum throughout the spring and summer of 2005. After Moss was spotted wearing a gold band on her finger, rumours circulated that the couple were about to get wed, which culminated in a joke ceremony at the Glastonbury Festival. Then followed the usual rounds of splits and reconciliations, all conducted through the ravenous tabloid press. Doherty seemed to be in danger of becoming a frivolous clown, a circus act or a facetious sideshow to the main story that was Moss's career and life. Although he was being discussed in all manner of incongruous publications, from Tatler to Marie Claire, his music was rarely mentioned. If it was, it would be a token reference to him having been in the Libertines. It was as if Babyshambles was just a comedy act barely worth dissecting. In May, Babyshambles supported Oasis in Paris, which would have been the biggest gig in their short history had Doherty not cancelled after another argument with Moss on the Eurostar train. Then, at a festival in Norway, they missed their place on the bill after enduring an extended search at Oslo airport. He smuggled in coke and heroin to celebrate getting back with Moss yet again, and vomited all over the front row revellers when he eventually made it onto the stage. Doherty's next fall from grace arrived in front of a record audience, this time at the Live 8 concert. Stumbling on stage drunk and or drugged up to the eyeballs, he massacred the Mark Bolan classic Children of the Revolution, whilst accompanied by Elton John on piano. The embarrassing sight of this wasted, out-of-tune wreck shaming himself in front of millions must have seemed like commercial suicide to his record label. In fact, he was the only artist performing at the show whose record sales dived in the aftermath, with the two Libertines discs dropping down the charts. To make matters even worse, he went on to insult Bob Geldof and audaciously tried to explain his inept performance by claiming that Geldof's teenage daughter, Peaches, had tried to come on to him backstage. In addition, he received the wrath of The Who's Roger Daltrey, who asserted that the Babyshambles wunderkind was wasting his life away. Whilst acknowledging that Doherty possessed talent, he said it was a shame that he was feeding off his drug addiction and frittering away his gifts. In the midst of this mayhem, Babyshambles somehow found time to issue a single. In August, they released their second, entitled Fuck Forever, which entered the top 10 and made folk heroes of Babyshambles all over again. This snotty, fiery track unsettled the radio authorities with its salacious scatology and punk-like attitude. Nevertheless, it scaled the heights of number 4 come the end of August. Fuck Forever is not one of Doherty's most subtle or profound creations, but it works perfectly as a scratchy, spiky indie rock anthem. The chorus of "I'll fuck forever if you don't mind" sticks in the brain like a nagging sepia-tinted memory. The affirmative guitar riff takes the song into another stratosphere, and Doherty's snarl of a vocal perfectly complements the ragged, insistent thrash. In September, Babyshambles became a last-ditch addition to the cast of Help, A Day in the Life, the War Child charity compilation. They entered a studio in London at the last minute and recorded a new track, Bollywood to Battersea. It was delivered to the War Child offices and was included on the final track listing alongside the likes of Block Party, Gorillaz, Keane, Maximo Park, Kaiser Chiefs and Radiohead. Babyshambles got involved after Patrick Walden confessed to NME that they would love to donate a song to the project. Anticipation for the forthcoming new album was reaching feverish proportions, with critics and fans trying to second-guess each other regarding the direction in which it would be heading. Some predicted a taut minimalist sound reared on punkish Libertines threads, whereas others hoped Doherty would follow through on his promise to detail his poetic vision of Arcadia. Some 2 months before the official release, the contents of the record were leaked onto the internet, and those who couldn't wait were able to satisfy their curiosity. The Moss and Doherty soap saga reached its zenith in September, when the Daily Mirror ran pictures of her taking cocaine in an all-night studio session and sent her world toppling. One of Doherty's cohorts had secretly filmed her and gone to the paper with his footage, which inspired outrage and led to her losing her high-profile fashion contracts. Doherty, who'd recently been seen brawling with other rock musicians over his wayward girlfriend and even attempted arson in his own bedroom, was implicated in this story, but emerged with a little more credit and sympathy than he had previously. Moss got the worst of it, particularly as she had forced the tabloids to settle out of court last time they had run stories about her taking coke, and had been keen to portray herself as clean living. Doherty himself spoke out against the media slaughtering of his girlfriend, which he described as a grand conspiracy. There were also allegations that Doherty's former manager, James Mullard, had been responsible for setting up Moss, taking the pictures and selling them to the Daily Mirror for a 6-figure sum. Suspicions arose when it came to light he had purchased audio surveillance equipment 2 weeks before Moss was caught on film. As if there wasn't enough controversy to distract fans from an impending album release, on the 1st of October 2005, the Babyshambles tour bus was raided by police and Doherty was charged on suspicion of possession of Class A drugs. He was bailed until December, despite claiming that the substances were related to his naloxone implant. This created some uncertainty amidst the looming release date for Down in Albion, with fans claiming that the record they had waited all year for was being used as a bit-part player in the wider saga of the supermodel's descent into drugs. Halfway through September, the album was still not ready for its final mixing, and as the new November release date crept nearer and nearer, its appearance seemed clouded in some doubt. The September-October tour of the UK proved to be very successful, stretching from Sheffield through Birmingham, Manchester and Norwich and to Southend and Bristol. Doherty described himself as like a greyhound out of the trap, pumped up on desire and the excitement of playing live again.
Good people in this beautiful country of ours, they know the score. You know what I mean? They might be a bit miffed or a bit concerned, or but who does he think, the fuck does he think he is? Like, crack, crack, crack. They know what crack is. Fucking hell. Do you know what I mean? I know more racists, sexists, bullies, aggressors than I do crackheads, and I know who I'd rather hang out with any day of the week.
The long-awaited debut album by Babyshambles, Down in Albion, finally saw the light of day on November the 14th, 2005. This remarkable, though inconsistent, 16-song opus was produced by Mick Jones and mixed by Mick Jones and Bill Price of Guns N' Roses and London Calling fame. It is a glorious, incandescent mess, dripping with ideas, sensitivity and potency, but also desperately needing a stronger editor at times. There are moments of wonder here, but they are also slotted next to puerile adolescent jams, shapeless generic rockers and pedestrian filler. The truly great songs are beautifully written pearls bolstered by strong, memorable melodies and deft songwriting, but many tracks sound like album outtakes and appear to be unrehearsed or unfinished. Fuck Forever is a two-fingered kiss to authority, featuring one of the group's genuinely scorching collective performances, lines such as "I can't tell between death and glory," "New Labour and Tory," and "I sever my ties because I'm so clever, but clever ain't wise," are invested with huge dollops of Doherty irony, self-awareness and articulate rage. Like the Replacements and the Undertones put together into a melting pot of punk fury, this song captures primitive rock and roll spirit with a snide recklessness, a swaggering menace, and a gleeful abandon. The moment of hesitation just before its lurching, rollicking chorus is a snippet of pop genius. La Belle et la Bête introduces Doherty's updated Weimar persona, the man of several voices detailing outsider tales over dissonant, noisy backings. The beat poet decadence and live fast, die young insouciance gives it a degree of urgency and exuberance, but it falls short of most of Doherty's offerings and peters out without leaving anything resembling an engaging tune. Presumably inspired by John Cocteau's telling of Beauty and the Beast, it features Moss on shivering backing vocals. "Is she more beautiful than me?" she asks impassively. Her enervated vocals sound eerie and the lyrics candidly address the celebrity circus in a sinister, playful manner. But it seems Doherty forgot to pen a melody. Pipe Down has a thrashy Seattle feel to it, documenting the squalor of a recording session with the dissolute swagger of a grunge act, or the literate Aussie post-punkers The Replacements. It also contains a section where the group descend into No Fun by the Stooges. A Rebors, the title of which is a homage to Joris Karl Hoymann's Decadence Handbook, offers a helping of nervy, scuzzed-up garage rock that initially evokes the rhythm of On a Rope from Rocket from the Crypt, before launching into something that could easily have fitted into the first Libertines record. It is another swaggering rocker with Doherty's finest sincere vocal. Kilimanjaro comes in a re-recorded guise and still sounds as rowdy and vital as ever. Meanwhile, 32nd of December offers a compelling tale of regret and helpless self-knowledge. What's thrilling me is killing me. Throughout, Babyshambles attempt to collate a range of musical influences veering from rock, reggae and indie to hip-hop in a similar way to The Clash's magisterial alchemy. However, Doherty's band lack a certain muscularity and conviction at this stage, so their assimilations can sometimes end up sounding contrived and ersatz. There are too many songs on this record, and a skillfully edited version would have helped the listener focus on the three highlights. The ridiculous Sticks and Stones is top of the list for that edit. Its fug of lazy, embarrassing cod reggae is a horrible idea, executed with the wit of Stu Francis at a children's birthday party, and should be forgotten. Doherty and pals sound too drunk, wasted or indolent to care here. Similarly, 8 Dead Boys is a sort of generic, half-assed garage song that Doherty could presumably have written in his sleep, and the dire, misguided Pentonville becomes immensely wearing and toxic after approximately 5 seconds. Despite the sonic variation offered by the Rastafarian General Santana's hosting his experiences with the boy wonder in the old Nick, one can't help feeling that this is taking ideas from The Clash too far. The Soup Dragons' I'm Free never sounded so slick and jubilant as when compared to this. Back from the Dead is utterly nondescript. However, at the heart of this project are a sprinkling of modern classics. Both Up the Morning and Merry-Go-Round are delicious nuggets of superior songwriting, conveying the melancholy and sadness behind the drug-chomping bravado. The former is beguiling, achieving its dreamlike effects with a startling precision and attention to detail. The latter is a candidate for the best track on the album, exuding tenderness, nostalgia and vulnerability. Sung purely to an acoustic guitar, it radiates lovelorn wistfulness and sends shivers down the spine. The key song on the album, Albion, is quintessential Babyshambles. Smattered with Doherty's empathy for the outcast, this rich, elusive, magical anthem in the making is the most perfectly realised expression of his Arcadian idyll. As he gently unfurls his vision of an England tantalisingly out of reach but still alive within his thoughts in his most vivid and sober moments. Gin in teacups and leaves on the lawn, violence in bus stops, and the pale, thin girl with eyes forlorn. The tabloid nonsense recedes into utter insignificance, and Doherty's erratic talent rings out with a romantic elegance rarely heard in British pop since Ray Davies and the Beatles. These are wonderful moments, but too much of Down in Albion is sketchy, petulant, haphazard and half-formed. Ideas evaporate or aren't developed properly. Too many tracks fade into nothingness after promising openings or are merely lackadaisical strolls and listless garage by numbers. The prevailing mood is one of fragmentation and decay, with a quietly nostalgic, elegiac atmosphere pervading the stronger cuts in particular. There is too much studio atmosphere and too many aimless longers. Some tracks outstay their welcome, even though they only come in at 3 minutes. The rhythm section at times sounds uninspired and offers a dull thud when something with more bite or swing is required. The album received massive coverage in the press and was lauded for its intelligence, its sadly futile attempt to cross-fertilise styles, and its lyrical candour. In the meantime, Rough Trade acted quickly to obscure the face of James Mullard in the video for the new Babyshambles single, Albion, which was released on November the 28th. At the end of the video, Doherty is seen walking into the distance with his former manager. There is also footage of Doherty with Moss, which suggests their relationship had survived the cocaine scandal. Moss went to an Arizona rehab clinic for 5 weeks to sort herself out and returned to resume her modelling career, while the hunt for the person who betrayed her to the Daily Mirror continued. Meanwhile, Doherty followed her to the same Meadows clinic in Arizona, assisted by the funds of his girlfriend. However, Doherty lasted just 9 days at the $1,500 a day clinic and staged his escape by putting out an SOS for cash for a flight home to London on a website. A female fan gave him the cash at San Francisco airport. Incredibly, on the day he flew to Heathrow, he was spotted looking wasted at a gig in London and was then arrested on suspicion of possessing crack cocaine the following night. Police found a crack pipe and 3 rocks of cocaine, so he was held in the cells overnight. He could face up to 7 years in jail if convicted, which would tarnish the Doherty musical legend and create a sad epitaph for this compelling and gifted but flawed character. He couldn't help but bitch about his on-off girlfriend, though, after revealing she was furious at him for quitting the clinic. She dumped him again, though Doherty bizarrely explained it had nothing to do with this. He claimed she finished with him because of his small penis and because he couldn't buy her diamonds. This sad story could well have a tragic conclusion.
I think either you're glamorous or you're not. I don't know if taking drugs would make you feel glamorous necessarily. Maybe the opposite. It might make you feel a bit dingy or sordid. Or maybe for a split second you might feel elevated or glamorous, but I'd never say drugs were glamorous or made me feel glamorous. For 6 months before we got signed, a lot of those songs, Horror Show, General Smuts, I Get Along, yeah, they're all to do with that rush and that push. And the land that we stand on is ours, or we think it's ours. That's another thing that drugs are useful for, creating a delusion.
For all his wayward and debauched ways, Pete Doherty is a well-read, articulate, intelligent and erudite young man with a formidable intellect, a profound imagination and a love of language. He is a published poet, and his inspirations and influences are derived as much from literature as they are from classic rock and roll. In this sense, he is hardly your standard indie hero or most people's idea of an alternative music figurehead in the 21st century. His preoccupations, heroes and inspirations are on a different plateau to what one might reasonably expect. Doherty has always been fired by books, ideas, art and philosophy, and these obsessions inform much of his work. It is as though he performs out his rock star fantasies on stage, but when it comes to the actual creation of his songs, he comes to his material from the perspective of a proper poet, a wordsmith fixated with how things can be communicated intensely and precisely through the written word. He clearly sees himself as a genuine writer, a prophet of yea-saying, an affirmation of living life to its limits, and in this sense can be seen as the modern-day incarnation of Arthur Rimbaud or Jack Kerouac. His Blakean visions of an idyllic England that perhaps only existed in the imagination also push him closer to the concerns of literature than of pop. As a child, he devoured the greats of English literature, eschewing children's books, fantasy or science fiction. He became immersed in the romantic mythology of England as a special, blessed, heightened state called Albion. This he borrowed from the great artist and poet William Blake. Though Blake's idyll was rural, Doherty formed his vision of Albion as an urban mystical landscape. From Dickens he absorbed the chaotic grittiness of London, and from the war poets he grabbed the concept of the dogged, resilient Tommy. He also buried himself in the innovations of Emily Dickinson, the gifted American poet whose isolation and anguish spoke to the teenage prodigy. The play, The Arcadians, from the early 20th century, was based on the book by Mark Ambient and Alexander M. Thompson, and Doherty clearly found a mythical resonance in these works. The Marquis de Sade, in particular, the raw unsettling the lusts of the Libertines, proved to be a significant influence on this budding rock and roll outlaw. The Romantic poets of the late 18th century and early 19th centuries were also hugely influential on this oddball outsider. He was drawn to the decadent works and lives of Shelley, Coleridge, Byron and Keats, clearly seeing himself as potentially being cut from the same cloth. Musically, Doherty's imagination was inflamed by a steady diet of innovative homegrown guitar rock pop from the 1960s through to the 1990s. He loved the Specials and the Clash as much as the Smiths and the La's. The Kinks' Ray Davies, with his quirky, deft portraits of English sensibilities and lives of quiet desperation, showed him that it was possible to compress a novel into a 3-minute pop song. Waterloo Sunset was the prime example. Morrissey's arch, knowing irony and self-awareness, not to mention his playful use of language and profound insight into a peculiarly British mindset, also offered a plethora of creative avenues. The Smiths' sense of a gang of ordinary lads against the world appealed to Doherty when it came to forming the Libertines, and there is more than a touch of Morrissey and Marr about the Barrett Doherty story. Other inspirations came from unlikely sources, whether it be Sid James and Carry On films, John Betjeman's expositions, Leonard Rossiter's bravura performances as the quintessentially English Rigsby in the television sitcom Rising Damp, or Philip Larkin's gloriously bleak insights into the nature of the English psyche. There can be no disputing that Doherty's breadth of influences mark him out as an outsider in recent English pop. His defiance of the indie orthodoxy makes him relentlessly intriguing and worthy of exploration.
How can such a lonely, or someone who spent many years as a lonely person claim to represent anyone else, unless it's just a group of freaks? But at the moment we seem to be freaking out the freaks. Do you know what I mean?
So who exactly is the real Pete Doherty? What lurks behind the mask of sullen, brattish bohemia and decadent hedonism? This brittle, elusive and fascinating young artist is such fascinating material for the celebrity-obsessed tabloid press because his flaunting of normal mores and values marks him out as living on the edge, like a latter-day outlaw. He is also compelling in a wider sense because of the tension and conflict between the earnest, dignified ambitions of his musical project and the torrid indignities of his private life. A further layer of intrigue is derived from his very public rock brat persona, his courting of the tabloid press, and his excruciating dependency on Kate Moss. It is a minor tragedy that for the most part, Doherty's personal travails tend to overshadow his creative abilities, at least for the casual observer accustomed to the soap opera developments of late. There is still some of the burning passion, scorching intensity and innate cultural curiosity that so impressed Carl Barrett when they met and bonded all those years ago. For Doherty, music, literature, television and poetry all seamlessly blended together into the same thing. And this is what fired Barrett's enthusiasm. He is a complex, multi-dimensional and evades easy categorisation. He is a modest, delicate character who possessed a belief in the visionary properties of drug consumption, a la Coleridge, Burroughs and Byron, the capacity to observe the Arcadian idyll in full technicolor, but this has given way to helpless dependency. Doherty now seems unsure of who he is or where he is heading. His sense of reality has become distorted by substance abuse and by living in a media bubble since Moss arrived on the scene. It is difficult to ascertain exactly who the real Doherty is. In recent times, as his cravings have multiplied, it is noticeable that he has got into bed with the tabloids at the drop of a hat, and as soon as he has needed money, a voice or an escape route. This has had the effect of him living his existence through the newspapers, the bizarre hypocrisy of many celebrities keen to have publicity on their terms when they want to sell product, but the first to moan when negative stories get printed, has infected Doherty. His desperate chasing of Moss during their intermittent breakups, his willingness to surrender his dignity and sense of self to be a footnote in her story, reeks of a pathological sadness. His Faustian pacts with his most natural enemies clearly trouble him too. Increasingly, Doherty has become a fitful, tawdry sideshow to the Kate Moss story. Where mainstream publications and television deign to offer a musical context, it's usually in terms of his being the former Libertines frontman. Even the Babyshambles album, which became a top 10 hit when it entered the charts, has further muddied the waters. Whilst it contains a series of plangent, emotional, superior pop songs of which any major songwriter would be proud, there are also large chunks that sound sloppy, underwritten and woefully performed. One can't help thinking that his brushes with the law and his tempestuous relationship with the nation's supermodel have contributed to this. In essence, Pete Doherty is clever, idiosyncratic, cultured, erudite and strong-willed, but these characteristics are hopelessly undermined by his numerous addictions, whether it be to drugs, or to celebrity, or to Miss Moss.
Very hard to say. Maybe in a few years I can look back and say, yeah, yes, absolutely, drug taking was negative for my creativity. But it's really hard to say. A stab in the dark, yeah, I'd say drug taking affected my creativity in that it just distract you, from picking up a pen or picking up a guitar. You'll pick up a foil flute or a needle or something that isn't going to help you write a song or write a poem. Simple, isn't it? When you're doing one thing, it stops you doing another.
Pete Doherty is one of the most distinctive, unusual, singular and interesting musical voices to have emerged in British rock in the past decade. He is capable of scaling peaks of excellence that place him in the bracket of the very best songwriters, whether it be Morrissey, Marr, Lennon, McCartney, Ray Davies, Jagger, Richards or Bob Dylan. The Babyshambles project offers a vision that remains tantalisingly elusive, but is consistently appealing in all its fragmentary, screwed-up, flawed beauty. It is a glorious concept in theory, but its execution thus far has been ridden with turmoil, incompetence and disinterest. Babyshambles have produced a body of work that repays continued exposure to it, yet one cannot help feeling that the band could be so much better if there was less of the extra baggage surrounding the whole project. Every time Doherty puts pen to page or delivers a sweet lyric, he threatens to engulf you with the intensity of his vision. And even those harshest critics of his lifestyle are somehow willing Babyshambles to be better than they are at this stage. A great sense of goodwill from critics and fans undercuts the ghoulish media obsession, but it seems unclear as to whether Babyshambles have it in them to transcend this mess and concentrate on becoming the best they can be. There is certainly massive potential for this group. Their heightened sense of Englishness for a start marks them out from the glut of moody, thin men in black currently learning 2 or 3 chords and scowling into a microphone. There is a fragility, an intelligence and a grandeur about them that renders them more suited to discussions in the New Statesman or the TLS than facile reviews in glossies and Sunday supplements. Songs like Albion, Merry-Go-Round and Up the Morning are handsomely written jewels that would grace any serious music lover's iPod. Albion in particular presents a place miles away from the jubilant idealism of the Libertines and could attain a similar status to that enjoyed by the Jams, That's Entertainment, namely an eloquent State of the Nation address. If he could eradicate and conquer his psychological and chemical demons, Doherty has all the raw material to become an outstanding songwriter. At the moment, though, it seems we'll have to be content with a very slim legacy.
Thank you for buying Maximum Babyshambles. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.